he wasn't the person we had discussed on Friday.
No, we might not get to him today. Al-Akhnas ibn Shurayq is basically the president of Zuhra. You know what is Zuhra? One of the branches of Quraysh is where the mother of the Prophet ﷺ was from, where Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas was from, Abdurrahman ibn Auf. He was basically the president of Zuhra. But it was just like what we were mentioning before, he's the president, but he's not a native. He's from Thaqif, but he's the president of Zuhra, and the Prophet ﷺ sent him the request, and he didn't send it to Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas or anyone else in Zuhra because of his authority amongst Quraysh. This man, Al-Akhnas ibn Shurayq, he's the one we talked about in Badr. What did Zuhra do?
Yeah, they just went back. They didn't participate.
They didn't participate. Once he learned that the caravan was safe, it was this man who told all of Zuhra, okay, the caravan is safe, we're all going back. And they all went back. Which shows you that he's in charge. Because in Utbah ibn Rabi'ah, we'll read this later, who was supposed to be in charge of all of Quraysh, especially the army, was suggesting things, and there were people who would contradict him. And he was suggesting that we don't have to do this, and people were taunting him and contradicting him until what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will took place. But Akhnas ibn Shurayq said that let's go back, and they all went back. So not one single person from Zuhra was at Badr. But he's from Thaqif. So that's the reason he uses to turn down the Prophet's application for safe conduct. He says, I'm a Halif, and I don't have the right to give safe conduct. I don't have the right to dictate to them. Allah, maybe he could have, like the man who was even more distant from, the man who gave safe conduct to Abu Bakr. He wasn't even in Quraysh, but they respected his sponsorship. For whatever reason, he didn't want to use his political capital, Al-Akhnas ibn Shurayq, so he declined the offer. Go ahead.
Then
Al-Akhnas ibn Shurayq is not going to be on the map.
It is there.
Oh yeah, that happened to be there. Yeah, but it's not on the
map
because he's not part of the lineage, but he's the president. Go ahead.
Then he sent a request to Suhail bin Amr, who replied, Amir can't dictate to Ka'b.
Who is Suhail ibn Amr?
He's the spokesperson or the orator from Quraysh. Treaty of Hudaybiyah.
Yes, that's him. He was the one who negotiated the Treaty of Hudaybiyah on behalf of Quraysh with the Prophet ﷺ. And in Quraysh, he's from which one of the counties of Quraysh?
Amir.
Amr. Did you?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's from Amr. And all of his brothers are Muslim, and some of his children are in Abyssinia now. Ibn Hisham says that the Prophet ﷺ sent a request for asylum to him. And he said, what did he say?
He said Amir can't dictate to Ka'b.
What does that mean?
Because they are of a less influence, so
Yeah. We talked about this before,
Yeah.
for some reason. This is Amr, and all of these are Ka'b. All of these are Ka'b. So he's saying that Amr can't dictate to Ka'b. We talked about Qusay is the Washington D.C., if you will, but it's not just Qusay that's in Ka'b, it's all of these others. He's saying Amr can't dictate to Ka'b. Maybe he could have or couldn't have, but he's not willing to spend his political capital. Go ahead.
Then he sent a request to Al-Mutaim bin Adi, who granted it. Al-Mutaim and his house took up their arms.
Now, who is Al-Mut'im ibn Adi? We read about him not too long ago.
The one who helped in the removal of the boycott? One of the...
Yes, he's the last one
Yeah.
that Amr ibn Hisham went to. You weren't here, sister.
No, I wasn't here. That's why I'm
We'll
looking
make
confused.
the material available to you.
Okay.
But we talked about the man who would... Yeah, this is why we talked about Amr before. Because the man, Amr ibn Rabi'ah, Hisham ibn Amr, excuse me, the one who started that, started lobbying people to overturn the boycott is from Amr.
Okay.
So he kept on going. He didn't have enough influence to do it or enough clout to do anything himself. So he lobbied these other decision makers. And he's from Amr, and this is Suhail ibn Amr. These are two of his brothers who were very early Muslims, and all of these are the ones who went to Abyssinia. And Soda, who was also from Amr, later married the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is Al-Mut'im ibn Adi. He's one of the ones who worked to have the boycott overturned. So the Prophet ﷺ applied to him for safe conduct, and he accepted. And as far as I know, it's the kind of norm that anyone who makes a request for asylum, it's accepted. As far as that's, even the norm among a lot of countries to this day. And as far as I know, it was the norm then. It's kind of like a point of honor, too. And remember what, alaykum as-salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Ahlan wa sahlan. Like what we talked about what Najashi said when the two envoys from Quraysh tried to convince him to extradite the refugees. He wasn't going to do that very easily without hearing their case. Al-Mut'im ibn Adi accepted the application of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And continue reading, brother.
Al-Mutaim and his house took up their arms and assembled in the prayer court. Then he notified God's messenger, "You may enter."
And they literally, he had militia behind him, and his sons actually wore their armor and came out and publicly made a display and let the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam make tawaf, and then he went back home. And he mentioned part of something that Hassan ibn Thabit said much later after Al-Mut'im ibn Adi passed away. Go ahead, read.
So God's messenger entered, circled the house and prayed, then went to his home. That is what Hassan bin Thabit was referring to when he said, "You secured God's messenger against them, making them your subjects for good and all."
Yes, and this is why it's the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala first and foremost, but the Prophet ﷺ entered Mecca again under the safe conduct of Al-Mut'im ibn Adi. Continue reading.
According to Abu Zinad, a man named Rabia bin Abbad ad-Dili who lived in Jahiliyyah and converted, said, I saw God's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam with my own eyes during the fair of Dhul Majaz, saying,
This, what we're going to read now are a number of. Did you finish reading the paragraph before that?
yeah,
You read the whole paragraph? You sure?
No, we didn't read the paragraph on top.
Yeah, we skipped to the footnote.
oh, okay. When God's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam came back to Makkah, his people were as fierce as ever in their hostility to him and their opposition to his religion, all but a few weak people who had faith in him. Now, whenever time for one of the fairs came around, God's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam would apply to all the
What are
Arab
the
nations.
fairs? The mawasim. What are the mawasim? Yes. Yeah, and the fairs that are like trade fairs, and there are also something bigger than that, like the Hajj.
Yeah.
Hajj, which is some of these fairs take place before and after the Hajj, and one of the ones that will be mentioned, Dhul Majaz, was either before or after the Hajj. And there's another very famous one. And they have the newspaper. Okal.
Yeah.
I think that was in Ta'if. It was in Ta'if. And there are a number of very... Badr was a Mosim. There was a yearly fair at Badr. And there were a number of other ones. The biggest one of these events would be the Hajj, when everybody would be coming. Everybody would be coming to Mecca. And all of the different Arab states would have representatives, would have delegations there. Go ahead.
Now, whenever time for one of the fairs came around, God's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam would apply to all the Arab nations that attended, calling them to God, informing them that he was a prophet with a mission, and asking their support and protection until he conveyed what God had charged him with. The only demand he would make was residence and asylum, saying, I can't compel anyone to do anything. If anyone likes what I preach, he can accept it, and if anyone objects, I can't compel him to do anything. All I ask is that you defend me against these attempts to kill me, and that you keep me safe so I can convey the messages my Lord sent me with, until God decides for me and my followers what he will. But no one would accept that. Whenever he approached one of those nations, they would say, this man's own people know him best. Do you think a man who messed up his own people is going to fix us? So that was a blessing that God reserved for the Ansar.
Now, here in what follows, we'll continue reading that next week, inshallah. The historians mention is that like what happened at Ta'if, the Prophet ﷺ spent years in Mecca applying to any of the different Arab nations who would come for asylum. Is there an extra copy of this that I can read? He mentions here there are two things that the Prophet ﷺ would speak of that it's important to understand there's a distinction between. He describes it, the Prophet ﷺ, in that second paragraph would apply to all of the Arab nations that came. What does he say after that? In the second paragraph.
The next page? Or?
No, this page. The one you read. No, this right here.
The only demand?
Right here. The second paragraph.
Now, whenever time for one of the fairs came around, God's Messenger ﷺ would apply to all the Arab nations that attended, calling them to God, informing them that he was a prophet with a mission, and asking their support and protection until he conveyed what God had charged him with.
In that paragraph, there are two different things that we'll read are part of what the Prophet ﷺ spoke of when he spoke to other people in this context. What are the two things?
Calling them to God and asking their support and protection.
One thing is first calling them to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and preaching to them. And another thing is applying for residence or applying for asylum. And those are two different things. Which one of those things would only be directed to specific people? Which one? Preaching or applying for asylum?
Applying for asylum.
The application for residence or for asylum. That was only directed, obviously, to decision makers and people who had the authority to grant that. But what we'll read here and what is apparent in the examples that follow is that the Prophet ﷺ would preach. And it seems he would preach first. He would convey the mission. He would ask for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala first before he requested something for himself. He would preach and he would apply for asylum. And in the request he was making for himself, I'm not asking that anyone has to do anything. I have to convey what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told me to convey. I can't force anybody to do anything. I'm just applying for residency, for asylum. But the Prophet ﷺ would preach to them as well. And the preaching we see in before and after, the preaching, there's no agenda in who is to be preached to. There's the Prophet ﷺ, we read it in Mecca, many of those the Prophet ﷺ preached to were, in the eyes of snobs, in the eyes of the scales of this world, were not big and influential with a lot of clout. And the Prophet ﷺ was commanded to preach to them and not to send them away for anyone else. And we read in the surah about the blind man. Abasa wa tawalla. And even in that story about the Christian man, or the Christian man in Ta'if, what was his name? Addas. Sometimes when they relate that story, they will say, well, that he never, before he talked to him, they'll say the Prophet ﷺ never thought anyone was too small to be preached to. And no one was too big to be preached to. So the Prophet ﷺ preached to, he conveyed what the message he was given, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, whether and he did that, apparently he did that first before petitioning for asylum. Those are two things that are, we should understand are separate things. And if you want to get your car fixed, you only go to a mechanic. If you want to apply for asylum, you apply to a community that has the authority to grant that. But preaching, there's no agenda in who you preach to, and the Prophet ﷺ was told, فَذَكِّرْ إِن نَفَعَتِ الذِّكْرَى. Preach whenever it does any good. And actually, it seems, Allah knows best, that when some people did accept the message that he preached, then he didn't ask for himself. Once some people as we'll read later, actually did accept the preaching, the Prophet ﷺ didn't ask for himself. And eventually those people asked him to come. Those people volunteered what they were able to give him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And we'll read those are the people that he refers to. That's the blessing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said for the Ansar. And we read that's the excuse some people gave for not accepting the petition of asylum, which is, I guess, one way of thinking about things. We read that Najashi, for example, didn't look at things that way. And it was, again, standard practice to accept someone's petition for asylum. And there are so many cases in history. One of the most common reasons someone would petition for asylum is they had killed someone. They were wanted for a crime. But here's someone who hasn't committed that, and this is the answer that a lot of people gave. And again, that was something that they missed out on. It was a blessing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala stored for the Ansar. We'll continue reading these events in the coming week, inshallah. اللهم اجعل جمعنا هذا جمعا مرحوما واجعل تفرقنا من بعده تفرقا معصوما ولا تدع فينا ولا معنا شقيا ولا محروما. ربنا إننا سمعنا مناديا ينادي للإيمان أن آمنوا بربكم فآمنا. ربنا فاغفر لنا ذنوبنا وكفر عنا سيئاتنا وتوفنا مع الأبرار. ربنا وآتنا ما وعدتنا على رسلك ولا تخزنا يوم القيامة إنك لا تخلف الميعاد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد وبارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت وباركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. ربنا اغفر لنا ولإخواننا الذين سبقونا بالإيمان ولا تجعل في قلوبنا غلا للذين آمنوا ربنا إنك رؤوف رحيم. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. جزاكم الله خير.